It started with flashing lights, shouting, and a prom queen crying into her corsage while a Diplomat security detail tackled a teenager next to a chocolate fountain. All I could do was stare from across the dance floor, still holding the parking stub for the limousine that never showed up. That limo wasn't meant for high school royalty. It was booked under a federal contract for a visiting royal diplomat, and it had just been hijacked by Karen, our HOA president, who decided her daughter deserved the VIP treatment. And now I was the guy responsible for explaining to two foreign agents why their high-profile guest was stranded, and a rhinestone-covered prom dress was currently desecrating the leather seats of a secure embassy vehicle. I wasn't laughing, but Karen was. 3 hours earlier, my front lawn was calm. The sun had just started dipping over the oak trees in our suburban cul-de-sac, casting that peaceful golden hour glow that makes everything look like a real estate brochure. I was checking my watch and triple confirming the route when I saw the black stretch limo roll past my driveway. Perfect timing. I was the assigned logistics contact for Prince Aman, a 17-year-old royal envoy attending an economic youth summit downtown. My job was simple: greet the driver, verify the route, and then return to normal HOA resident life before anyone even noticed. Except that Karen noticed. From across the street, I saw her golf cart whip around the corner like it was chasing a fugitive. She was standing before the limo even came to a stop. Her daughter, Tiffany, was in full prom gear, sky blue mermaid dress, glitter heels, hair teased into oblivion. Karen was shrieking, waving papers in the driver's face, and pointing toward their house like she was directing air traffic. I dropped everything and sprinted across the yard. By the time I got there, the driver looked completely shell-shocked. Karen was still talking fast and loud, weaponizing PDA energy like it was a military-grade device. Tiffany was already halfway into the limo, taking selfies. I reached the car, panting, and shouted her name. Karen turned to me like I was a mosquito. "Oh, hello, Leo," she said flatly. "What are you doing interfering with my daughter's special moment?" "That's not your limo," I said. "It's a federally booked secure transport for a foreign diplomat. You can't just take it." She blinked at me, then laughed. "You mean the diplomat who didn't show up? You were late. My daughter is more important than some bureaucrat's nephew. We have pictures scheduled at the Botanical Gardens. If you needed it so badly, you should have been on time." I looked at the driver, who shrugged helplessly. She said she was authorized. She had documents. She had forged something from the HOA printer. I knew because the HOA letterhead had a typo. She spelled the word limousine as limousine. I watched the limo pull away, Tiffany waving like royalty out the sunroof. Karen tossed her arm around the driver's seat and called out, "Enjoy your little conference, Leo, maybe next time book earlier." The moment the taillights vanished, my phone rang. "Embassy line." I swallowed hard and answered. "Where is the vehicle?" the voice asked immediately. About that I started sweating. By the time I explained, they were already tracing the GPS. Prince Aman had landed 30 minutes early. He and his 2 security personnel were standing outside the terminal, waiting. The limo was now driving away in the opposite direction toward Prom. A secure vehicle, outfitted with encrypted communications, confidential documents in the glove compartment, and a diplomatic emblem on the license plate, was in the hands of a teenage girl named Tiffany who had once thrown a tantrum at the neighborhood pool for not having imported cucumber water. The agents were not amused. A black SUV pulled up to my house 10 minutes later. They didn't knock. One of them stepped out with an earpiece and sunglasses and asked only one question: "Do you have any idea what you've just allowed to happen?" I didn't. Not really. Not until he showed me the live feed. The limo had a built-in dashcam and interior security footage. I watched Tiffany pour a bottle of pink champagne over the floor while shrieking, "This is better than Vegas." Karen was heard bragging in the background about pulling strings through her HOA position. The words "diplomatic transport" appeared on the screen more than once. The feed was being transmitted back to an international security hub. "Sir," the agent said flatly, "we just crossed into a potential breach of diplomatic protocol. If those kids open that glove box or touch the phone inside, we're not just dealing with local law. We're looking at an international incident. I felt the color drain from my face. Karen had always been overbearing. She once fined me for leaving a garden gnome too close to the sidewalk. But now she had stolen a vehicle registered to a foreign government. And she had absolutely no idea. We tried calling her. She declined. I sent 3 texts. She replied with a selfie of Tiffany stepping out of the limo in front of the school gymnasium captioned "Eat your heart out, peasants." The agent stared at the phone and said, "I'm going to pretend I didn't see that. But this is now a recovery operation." They tracked the limo's location to the prom venue. Police units were dispatched discreetly. I rode with them, still in disbelief. The gym had been transformed into a glittering nightmare of streamers, DJ lights, and a fog machine working overtime. Outside, the limo was parked diagonally on the curb. Tiffany's heel was lodged in the grill. Inside, we pushed through groups of teenagers who parted like the Red Sea when they saw the suits and badges. The limo driver had abandoned the vehicle in panic. Karen was holding court near the snack table, explaining to a group of parents how she'd heroically secured last-minute government transport to ensure Tiffany's big night wasn't ruined. Her speech was interrupted when an agent tapped her on the shoulder and whispered something in her ear. Her face fell. "You're joking," she hissed. "You're making a scene at my daughter's prom." "Ma'am," the agent replied, "you are currently in possession of a protected vehicle issued under federal oversight. That's not just grand theft. That's interference with international operations." Tiffany, still posing for photos, looked up and shouted, "Wait, this is illegal?" "You said we rented it." Security moved fast. Cameras clicked. Parents gasped. Someone knocked over the chocolate fountain. And amid all the chaos, Prince Aman arrived in the back of a different SUV, stepped out in a tailored suit, and took one look at the mess before muttering one word. "Unbelievable." And just like that, a suburban prom turned into a national embarrassment. And it was all thanks to Karen, who thought the rules didn't apply when her daughter needed a ride. The next morning started with a knock that rattled my front door like it owed someone money. I opened it to find 2 stone-faced agents standing on my porch holding tablets and legal folders. Their silence said everything before a word left their mouth. I stepped aside without asking and gestured them in, still groggy from what had become the most humiliating night of my professional life. As I poured stale coffee into a chipped mug, one of the agents finally spoke. The limousine, he informed me, had been towed to a secure facility overnight. They recovered the sat phone, the diplomatic seal, and, to their great dismay, several empty perfume bottles, glittery napkins, and a rhinestone hair clip jammed into the USB port. I tried to respond with something useful, but all I managed was a choked laugh. Apparently, Karen's daughter had used the secure device as a selfie prop and spilled soda into the cup holders while declaring the seats too dry and not pink enough. The agents were still trying to scrub the footage of Tiffany twerking inside a car meant for state officials. One of them muttered that the diplomatic corps was in full damage control mode and that I should prepare for inquiries, reports, and a possible formal reprimand. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance anymore, she was a walking international incident. Despite all of that, Karen still thought she was the hero. I learned this when I walked to the HOA office to personally confront her and demand an apology. The place was buzzing. Karen stood at the center like a Roman emperor, waving printed screenshots of the prom night like trophies. "Can you believe the attention Tiffany got?" she said to a cluster of board members. "We had over 50,000 likes on that limo arrival video. That's called influence." She didn't even flinch when I entered. "You stole a government vehicle," I said without preamble. "That limo wasn't a toy, Karen. It had encrypted hardware. It had royal insignia. You paraded a classified asset around a high school gym." Karen blinked slowly, then gave me her signature smirk. "Oh please," she said, turning her back to me. "It was parked on a public street. Nobody said anything at the time. You can't just slap a sticker on a car and expect everyone to bow to it. Besides, we needed it more. Your prince didn't even show up on time. I held up the embassy report printout. He showed up early. Your daughter left the scene before he landed. She scoffed. Semantics. As I prepared to launch into a second, less polite rant, Karen reached into a drawer and pulled out a stapled document. I have the receipt, she declared proudly, slapping it down on the desk. I picked it up. It was laughably fake. The logo was off-center, the date was written as prom night, and the address listed was my own, but crossed out with crayon. I couldn't decide if I was more insulted by the fraud or by how lazy it was. The agents reviewed it later and didn't even bother to hide their laughter. This might be admissible in a clown court, one muttered, but not here. The situation escalated quickly. Word of the prom limo incident spread beyond the neighborhood. Within hours, national gossip sites picked it up. Headlines like "Prom Queen Steals Diplomatic Limo" and "Karen Strikes Again" made their rounds online. A TikTok account posted a side-by-side of Tiffany posing in the limo and a royal motorcade using the same vehicle type. The caption read, "Guess which one ended in federal charges?" Even worse for Karen, someone from the embassy leaked footage of her loudly declaring she paid taxes and therefore technically owned the car anyway. The internet had a field day. Memes exploded overnight. Karen, ever the oblivious narcissist, thought she was going viral for the right reasons. Meanwhile, Tiffany remained completely unbothered. She'd turned her limo stunt into a full-on brand. She posted a video titled, "How My Mom Got Me a Royal Ride, No Cap," and offered shout-outs to followers who shared her post. I watched in horror as teenagers praised her icon energy, and parents in the comments screamed in disbelief. No one, apparently, realized or cared that this stunt nearly triggered an international investigation. No one except the people in my living room holding government badges and questioning my career. As if that wasn't enough, the next blow landed hard. The royal family wasn't just upset, they were embarrassed. Prince Aman, a poised young man who somehow managed to look both dignified and exhausted at all times, had to be escorted in a rental sedan with no security detail because of Karen's stunt. His parents sent a formal letter to our State Department and to the HOA. Yes, you read that correctly. An official diplomatic letter was addressed to Karen in her role as HOA president. The letter politely but firmly expressed disappointment in the local governance structure's inability to protect designated assets and prevent unauthorized misuse of diplomatic property. Karen framed it. She put it on the HOA bulletin board with a note that read, "We've got international attention now, folks. This community is finally on the map." When I saw it, I nearly ripped it down with my bare hands. But I didn't have to. 2 nights later, the HOA meeting was chaos. Residents were fed up. Karen had fined someone for putting up fairy lights, tried to ban chalk drawings, and once made a widower remove a memorial bench because it clashed with the grass. But this time, she'd gone too far. The room buzzed with resentment, whispers, and not-so-subtle death stares. One resident, Mrs. Talbot, stood up and said what everyone was thinking. "You used your power to hijack something you had no right to touch. And now you're acting like we should thank you for humiliating our neighborhood in front of the entire country." Karen didn't flinch. She smiled sweetly and said, "You're welcome." That's when we all realized something terrifying. Karen didn't care about rules, reputations, or even legal consequences. She was in it for the attention. She loved the chaos. And she'd burn the whole neighborhood down if it meant another 5 minutes in the spotlight. After the meeting, I met privately with the agents one last time. We needed to figure out how to manage Karen's continued delusions of grandeur. That's when they dropped a quiet bombshell. They hadn't retrieved everything from the limo yet. A tracking tag was missing. The sat phone had signs of tampering. And most unsettling of all, someone had accessed an encrypted frequency. Briefly, but enough to raise red flags. That frequency was meant only for diplomatic use. and if Karen or her daughter had managed to accidentally or deliberately interfere with it, the fallout could be far worse than a viral scandal. It could border on espionage. I sat back, suddenly cold. What had started as a ridiculous prom stunt was now teetering on the edge of a national security issue. And the worst part? Karen still thought she'd done nothing wrong. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. This was a delusion with consequences. And somehow, I knew we'd only seen the beginning. The following week felt like living in a fever dream, wrapped in a sitcom, wrapped in a courtroom drama. I couldn't open my email without seeing some fallout from Karen's prom night power grab. One thread was from the Department of State asking for a formal timeline of the limo's movements and access logs. Another was from a local news outlet requesting a comment on the suburban HOA president who commandeered a diplomatic vehicle. But the most disturbing message came from a federal agency I'd never even heard of, asking whether Karen had made contact with or spoken to any foreign national during or after the incident. That was the moment I realized things weren't just embarrassing anymore. They were dangerous. Despite all this, Karen continued strutting around the neighborhood like she was campaigning for queen of the cul-de-sac. She started referring to her daughter as our little diplomat in training, and hung a framed screen cap of Tiffany stepping out of the limo on her front porch. Below it, a plaque read "A night to remember." Someone spray-painted, "Until the charges hit," underneath it by morning. Karen blamed me for that too, of course. According to her, I was jealous of their spotlight and trying to make her look bad on purpose, as if her stealing an international transport was just a quirky misunderstanding. The neighborhood was cracking under the tension. At first, people thought it was just another one of Karen's stunts. But as news coverage deepened and the memes exploded, especially the one where Karen's face was pasted onto the Statue of Liberty with the caption "Give me your tired, your poor, your prom queens," they started to realize how serious it had become. The video of Tiffany dancing in the limo, while holding what she called the diplomatic disco phone, had crossed 10 million views. Worse still, someone slowed it down and zoomed in on a red-lit control panel visible behind her that no teenager should ever have been near. Government analysts were now reviewing footage from a high school prom for signs of international protocol breaches. That sentence alone made me want to fall into the earth. But nothing could prepare us for what came next. One morning, as I was dragging my trash bins to the curb, a town car pulled into the cul-de-sac. It didn't look official. No flags or badges, just understated and very polished. Out stepped Prince Aman, wearing a simple blazer and an expression so calm it made my spine straighten. I walked over before any of the neighborhood looky-loos could swarm. He shook my hand and said, "I thought it appropriate to visit the people directly involved. I want to understand how this could have happened." His tone wasn't accusing, just disappointed. It made me feel worse than if he had yelled. I invited him inside immediately, while half the neighborhood pretended to water their grass to eavesdrop. We sat down in the living room, and I offered him tea, which he politely declined. His translator stayed quiet as Prince Aman looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you believe this woman will do it again?" I didn't have to think long. "Yes," I said. "She's drunk on attention, not remorse." He nodded slowly, then pulled something from his blazer pocket. It was a printed photo, Tiffany, draped dramatically across the limo seat, holding up the embassy sat phone like it was a trophy. "This is now part of an official security file," he said. "Our intelligence wing traced multiple outgoing signal attempts from that device. It was not encrypted properly. It triggered alerts." My stomach dropped. "You think she tried to what? Use it to contact someone?" "No," he replied. "But she may have caused interference on secure lines. We're still investigating whether that led to the blackout in our convoy communications that night." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen had potentially jeopardized a royal motorcade. Also, her daughter could arrive at prom like a princess in a Disney reboot. The visit didn't end there. Prince Aman asked to see the HOA office. I warned him it would be ridiculous, but he insisted. So I drove him and his assistant 2 blocks over to the one-room HOA building, a converted toolshed painted beige with a fake potted plant by the door. Inside, Karen was at her desk, head buried in HOA bylaws like she was crafting legislation for national defense. When she looked up and saw him, she gasped like a fangirl meeting a celebrity. "Oh my goodness," she gushed, standing quickly and brushing imaginary dust from her blouse. "It's an honor to finally meet you, Your Highness. I hope Tiffany's ride didn't cause too much trouble. We just wanted her to feel like royalty too." I froze. She actually said that. Prince Aman's face was unreadable. He nodded slightly and said, "And how often do you authorize use of other people's property in your capacity as HOA president?" Karen laughed. "Oh, we're very flexible here. Community needs come first." He glanced at the stack of violation letters behind her, all stamped in red. "Flexible," he repeated. Interesting choice of word. To her credit, or maybe to her ignorance, Karen doubled down. She launched into a full speech about community service, how the HOA had always made decisions for the greater good, and how certain residents, meaning me, were constantly undermining unity. She then attempted to hand him a flyer for her upcoming HOA Gala fundraiser. He didn't take it. As we walked out, he turned to me and said, "This woman governs more like a monarch than I do." The next day, the residents gathered for an emergency vote. The air was electric. For the first time in years, people who had never attended a single HOA meeting were showing up. Some wore shirts that said "Free the limo." Others held signs that read "No crown without consent" and "Down with Queen Karen." It wasn't just petty revenge anymore. People were furious. Karen had become a liability. The vote was swift. She was removed from her position by an overwhelming majority. Her only supporter was her best friend Glenda, who abstained, probably out of fear of being disinvited from Karen's next wine and cheese party. The rest of the room erupted in applause. Karen stood silently at the front of the room, her hands shaking, her face pale. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. After the meeting, I was approached by several board members who practically begged me to take over as interim president. I didn't want the job, but I couldn't say no. Not after everything that happened. I agreed, with one condition, that the first order of business would be banning any unauthorized contact with vendors, drivers, or government services by HOA officials. Everyone agreed. But the Karen saga wasn't over. That night, as I stood outside sipping a drink and finally breathing freely, I noticed movement across the street. Karen was out in her front yard, tearing down the framed limo picture with shaking hand. Her porch lights were off. Her social media had gone silent. But her eyes caught mine as she turned around, and what I saw there wasn't regret. It was planning. Karen wasn't finished. She was embarrassed, dethroned, and boiling over with spite. And as I watched her stalk back into her house, I had the sinking feeling that whatever she was cooking up next would make the limo stunt look like a harmless prank. Because you can take the crown off a Karen, but you can't take the entitlement out of her. Not without a fight. It started small. A traffic cone in my driveway that hadn't been there the night before. My sprinkler system, which had worked fine for years, suddenly malfunctioning and spraying the mailbox instead of the lawn. Then it escalated. City code inspectors showing up at my door, asking about a supposed unpermitted structure on my property, something about a shed I never built. A fire marshal came the following day, responding to an anonymous tip about stored propane tanks near my garage. I didn't own a single propane tank. All of it screamed one thing. Karen was back, and she was not playing fair. After being voted out as HOA president, Karen didn't vanish the way some would in disgrace. She went silent, which in her case was worse. She wasn't the type to give up power. She was the type to go underground and plot its return. I saw her less, but when I did, it was always from a distance. Peeking through her curtains, circling the block on foot instead of her usual golf cart, or standing too long at the community board like she was memorizing the bylaws she once twisted for sport. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The first real sign of her revenge came on a Thursday morning when I received an email from the city's zoning office, alerting me that multiple complaints had been filed under my name. They accused me of improperly hosting foreign guests, engaging in unauthorized security gatherings, and operating what the emails called a private intelligence base. The language was absurd, and it took me a few rereads to realize what Karen was doing. She was using my role in the diplomatic limo debacle against me, flipping the narrative to suggest that I, not she, had abused international resources. And she was forging emails to back it up. I rushed to the city office with proof that the complaints were falsified. The clerk was sympathetic but cautious. These weren't just neighborhood gripes. They had come through official channels, loaded with attachments and supposed evidence, including a screenshot of an edited email with my name at the bottom that read, "Prepare the secure channel. The prince will arrive tonight." I had never written those words in my life. Karen had either fabricated them entirely or twisted some old correspondence into a Frankenstein of lies. I brought this straight to the federal agents still assigned to oversee the aftermath of the limo incident. When they saw the email, their faces dropped. One of them pulled me aside and asked, "Has she had access to your network or mailbox at any time since the incident?" I said no. I had changed every password, secured every device, and even updated my router firmware twice out of paranoia. Still, they weren't convinced. Someone was trying very hard to make it look like I had crossed a line, and they had the resources to make it convincing. That's when I learned Karen had once worked in municipal record. Years ago, before her reign of HOA terror, she had processed permits and handled clerical work in a local government office. She wasn't just manipulative, she was trained. She knew how to talk like the system, how to write like the system, and more dangerously, how to file fake complaints that looked legitimate on the surface. That kind of knowledge in the hands of someone like Karen was more dangerous than a weapon. It was sabotage disguised as bureaucracy. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was caught in its own chaos. With Karen gone from the helm, HOA meetings had become actual spaces for productive conversation. People were trying to rebuild trust. But rumors started swirling about my intentions. Some whispered that I had used the HOA role for secret government contract. Others claimed I had been placed in the neighborhood to watch over foreign asset. It sounded laughable, but the seed had been planted. And Karen knew it would grow if she just watered it with the right amount of suggestion. I decided to fight back, not with retaliation, but with truth. I compiled every piece of communication from the original limo arrangement, every email between myself and the embassy, every signed contract, timestamp, and security memo. I put them in a binder and delivered it to the HOA board in a transparent presentation. No drama. No accusations. Just facts. When I finished, I left it on the community center's info table with a sign that said, "For those still confused." But Karen wasn't trying to win over facts. She was trying to win over fear. That's why, on a Saturday night, I got a visit that nearly broke me. A man in plain clothes knocked on my door, claiming to be with an investigative unit looking into diplomatic interference. He flashed a badge too quickly and started asking about the security layout of my backyard. But something felt off. His tone was too casual, his questions too bizarre. When I asked for identification again, he pretended to take a phone call and left. I reported it immediately. The agents reviewed my security footage and froze the screen on the man's face. They ran it through a database and confirmed he was not with any government agency. He was a freelance private investigator, someone you hire when you want information or worse, to intimidate. It didn't take a genius to guess who had hired him. At this point, the agents were done playing defense. They began building a formal case against Karen. Not for the limo theft. That had already been addressed in diplomatic channels. No, this was for ongoing harassment, falsifying legal documents, impersonation, and obstruction of an active federal investigation. And they were ready to act. Before they could, Karen made one last move. It happened at the next HOA meeting, where she stormed into the room despite being removed from power. She demanded to speak. No one stopped her. She walked to the front and announced, "I am filing a motion to reverse my removal and investigate our current leadership for foreign collusion." The room went dead silent. I stood. "Karen, you're not on the board. You don't hold a position here. You were removed by vote." She turned and said, "Votes can be corrupted. People can be manipulated. Especially by outsiders with international connections." That's when a voice from the back of the room spoke up. It was Prince Aman. He had returned to formally address the community and put an end to the madness. Standing tall and calm, he said, "There is no collusion. There was only a mistake, yours, which has now endangered multiple people. I came to thank this neighborhood for fixing the situation swiftly. But I will not allow your delusions to rewrite history." Karen looked like she had been slapped with a gavel. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The room applauded. Not for me. Not even for the prince. But for sanity returning. But that wasn't the final blow. A week later, the agents returned, not for questioning, but for arrest. They showed up at Karen's house with warrants. Her fake emails, her harassment, and the tampered evidence had crossed the line into criminal territory. She had impersonated federal identities, leaked protected information, tried to create false flags to frame me. They took her away in cuffs while the neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Her daughter cried. Her friend Glenda fainted. And as the car pulled away, sirens fading into the distance, I finally exhaled. It was over. At least, that's what I thought. The silence that followed Karen's arrest was surreal. For the first time since I moved into the neighborhood, the air didn't feel heavy with her entitlement. No surprise inspections. No threatening HOA emails. No strange cones mysteriously appearing in driveways. People walked their dogs a little slower. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without being scolded for riding scooters. It was as if a thick fog had lifted, and everyone was breathing clearly for the first time in years. But while most of the neighborhood celebrated, I couldn't quite relax. The storm had passed, yes, but the damage was still scattered across the landscape. And I wasn't naive enough to think it was truly over. The investigation into Karen's actions went public almost immediately. News outlets, already familiar with the prom night limo scandal, devoured the updates like sharks in bloody water. Reports of forged emails, impersonation of federal officers, and a list of HOA rule violations longer than most criminal records flooded the feed. Karen had not only endangered an international visitor, but also spent the following weeks trying to orchestrate an elaborate frame job. It was the kind of case that made late-night talk shows salivate. One host even joked, "Who needs Netflix when you have Karen and the HOA?" Despite her absence, Tiffany returned to school acting like a reality show contestant between seasons. She told classmates her mom was framed, that the prince was just jealous he didn't have her charisma, and that one day she'd run the country like Karen ran the HOA. The saddest part? A few kids believed her. But not many. Most were just glad the drama was finally fading. Prom night had turned from a memory into a meme, and people were ready to move on. Meanwhile, the HOA was trying to rebuild from the inside out. I was still serving as interim president, and the board was working overtime to fix what Karen had broken. We revised the bylaws to prevent unilateral decisions. We implemented transparency requirements. No more fake violations. No more secret fines. No more printing made-up rules in Comic Sans. It was slow work, but necessary. One of our first major decisions was to host a neighborhood-wide event, something to bring everyone together and replace the toxic legacy Karen had left behind. It started as a joke. One of the newer residents said, "If Tiffany got a prom in a limo, maybe we should throw our own celebration, with a real guest of honor this time." That idea sparked something. Within a week, plans were underway for an outdoor gala, open to all ages, celebrating community, redemption, and yes, irony. The highlight? A special appearance by Prince Aman, who, to our amazement, agreed to attend. We called it Prom 2.0, no crowns, no Karens. The entire cul-de-sac was transformed. String lights crisscrossed the street. Local bands played. Food trucks lined the curb. Families set up lawn chairs and danced in the road. And right at the edge of it all, parked proudly, was the original limo. Restored, cleaned, and now harmless, it had been returned by the embassy as a symbol of goodwill. It no longer held secure devices or sensitive material, just balloons, ribbon, and a big white sign across the side that read, Ride of Redemption. Prince Aman arrived in a modest sedan this time, smiling graciously as residents thanked him for his patience and poise throughout the ordeal. He shook hands, took photos, and even joined in on a group dance. At one point, he stood near the stage and raised a cup of soda. To lessons learned, he said, and to never again trusting neighborhood associations without background checks. The crowd roared with laughter. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen. Her bail had been denied, and she remained in custody while the case moved forward. But the legal team handling the situation made it clear, she wouldn't be behind bars forever. Given her background, the charges, and the fact that no physical harm had occurred, she'd likely serve a reduced sentence followed by probation. Still, the damage to her reputation was irreversible. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood like a suburban queen was now a national cautionary tale. Even so, we took no chances. The HOA passed a resolution barring any previously removed president from ever seeking office again. We also instituted an annual audit process to ensure that no one person could ever dominate the association like Karen had. Transparency, checks and balances, and a little healthy paranoia became our new motto. But the most unexpected development came weeks later. I was sorting mail one afternoon when I noticed a package with a foreign return address. No postage company I recognized. I brought it inside, peeled away the layers, and found a beautifully framed photograph. It was from that infamous night at prom. Tiffany standing beside the limo, throwing up a peace sign, completely unaware of the chaos she'd triggered. But someone had cropped the photo cleverly, removing everything incriminating and focusing just on the ridiculous glamour of the moment. Below it, a small plaque read, "Sometimes the ride chooses you." Attached was a handwritten note. It was from Prince Aman. It read, "Consider this a token of goodwill, and a reminder that diplomacy sometimes requires a sense of humor. Thank you for staying grounded when others weren't. Your country is lucky to have citizens like you." I didn't know whether to laugh or frame it. I did both. The picture now hangs in my hallway just before the door that leads outside. A daily reminder of just how bizarre things can get when one person decides the rules don't apply to them, and how far a community can come when it chooses to stand up instead of stay silent. Eventually, life settled. The headlines moved on. Tiffany found a new hobby in social media influencing and started reviewing fast food as if she were critiquing fine cuisine. The neighborhood rebuilt not just its rules but its relationship. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years now shared tools, traded gardening tips, and occasionally cracked jokes about our wild royal chapter. And the limo? It made one last appearance. A retired couple on the block asked if they could use it for their vow renewal ceremony. We all chipped in to make it happen. On a sunny Saturday, they rolled down the cul-de-sac waving like royalty, music blasting, with the entire neighborhood cheering. It was the perfect full circle, a symbol of excess transformed into joy, entitlement replaced with community, and Karen's legacy rewritten without her. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far it all went. One limousine, one entitled woman, one prom night that spiraled into diplomatic mayhem. But somehow, out of the chaos, we found clarity. We learned that authority without humility is dangerous, that ego in the hands of someone unchecked can tear through even the most peaceful places. But more importantly, we learned that when good people step up and say, "No more," the tide can turn. It's easy to think of HOA drama as petty, but sometimes the smallest kingdoms are where the biggest battles begin. And in our case, we won, not just against a Karen, but for each other. And if another Karen ever rises? Well, we've got the limo. We've got the stories. And this time, we're ready.